That's what their interest is in. And so there is some, I think, jockeying and push and pull in like what direction they're going to do. But Monday, it seemed big
Yeah.
tent to me.
Let's talk about that, because we're talking about the flexing of power. And I think we have to sort of reckon with what is the nature of that power. And when we talk about campaign seasons, like midterm campaign seasons or presidential election campaigns over time, there oftentimes is an emerging narrative of like who is going to be the pivotal voting group. I remember from when I was a kid, this was in 96, the soccer moms, right? Which was ultimately didn't prove to be all that impactful in that presidential election. And then you flash forward to 2009 with the Tea Party movement, which was hugely impactful. And these are different groups that can sort of like take over how we talk about the election. And right now in the midterms, the MAHA Moms are one of the most powerful emerging narratives. And what I think is interesting about it, and it gets to that Big Ten, there was an article in The Atlantic, I think yesterday, talking about the horseshoe nature of the MAHA movement politically. And horseshoe political movements they're attracting the very far left and the very far right and using their power in that way. I think it originates in the idea of the similarities between the communists in Russia, in the Soviet Union, and the Nazi Party in World War II.
Yikes.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's a term. It doesn't mean that the MAHA movement is that. But like there is some belief that this is what the MAHA movement is. It captures the left or like the ideology left, ideology of the right, but not at that rally, right? Not really, right? They got real. I mean, Booker is pretty mainstream. Massey's fairly, he's a Republican, but he's pretty down the middle. What do you think?
I think Horseshoe applies. I mean, Massey and Pingree, the two members of the House that were there, they've worked together for a long time on things where the right and the left have agreed on, like in like the food movement. Things like more access to raw milk. Far left, far right tend to agree. It's been a little bit fringy, but and I think even a little more mainstream would be like access to small scale slaughter, like for farmers, like so that they can market their meat, like expanded market opportunities for small farmers. Like they work together on those issues. And there's always been this horseshoe element of the so-called food movement, right? Like Joel Salatin was at this rally. He is a conservative. I think he calls himself a lunatic farmer. That's like what he called the lunatic farmer. He was in he was featured heavily in The Omnivore's Dilemma in Michael Pollan's book, and then was in Food Inc. And, so there's always been an element of that in the so-called food movement where like the right and the left kind of move together and agree on some things. And I think when you look at the populist nature of the MAHA movement, it makes sense. Like as the right starts adopting more of this anti-corporate populist rhetoric, like it kind of makes sense. They're going to agree on things like corporate consolidation, trying to limit corporate power. They don't like the way the big ag system is set up, the commodity, like they kind of agree on that stuff. It's always a question of like, can they get enough? Can they put that enough in the mainstream that it moves the needle? I don't know. I think we're at the very beginning of even knowing the answer to that question, but it's really interesting to watch. And I think one of the reasons why there were so many reporters there is that it does feel like, when we've talked about this so much, maybe they're listening to this podcast, but it does feel like there is a meaningful and really interesting political realignment that's sort of swimming around this that people are trying to figure out.